This is a story my dad told me not too long ago about my grandpa and how he came extremely close to being murdered. My grandpa used to be a pastor at a local church. And one night, when he was driving home from service, he was still wearing his robes and collar. He saw a hitchhiker at the side of the road and decided to pull over and pick him up like he usually would. He pulled over and the man got in. The man was wearing overalls and was carrying an old metal lunchbox with him. My grandpa assumed that he was a construction worker who didn't have a ride home after a shift. My grandpa started to converse and eventually arrived at the man's destination. The man got out and thanked my grandpappy for the ride. A few days later, my grandpa was talking to his neighbor. At one point in the conversation, she brought up a story she'd seen in the news about a man who gets rides from people by hitching. When he would reach his destination, he'd take a knife out of an old metal lunchbox and kill the person driving. My grandpa almost fainted after hearing the news. He assumed the only reason he was alive and talking to her was because of the robes and the collar he was wearing. My mom was born in late 50s in Detroit, so keep in mind I kind of came from SF. A time when it was more socially acceptable to play in the streets at night, talk to strangers and not have to worry. Winters in Michigan are rough. There was snow and sleet everywhere, and you really couldn't go anywhere without a bundle of clothes. She was coming out of her local grocery store, and this little old lady came up to her, with her face almost covered. The woman explained that she needed a ride to her house. My mom was reluctant at first, and questioned why she didn't have any family or money for a phone call to pick her up. Although she told me that she used to pick up hitchhikers a lot, she figured this frail old lady shouldn't be out in the cold by herself. My mom started putting the groceries in the trunk and said it was okay to get in the car. The woman got in the back seat. My mom just figured she was probably more comfortable in the back, so she didn't question it. She set the car on drive and they went on their merry way. The woman explained to her that her house was just a few blocks away. When Mom began to wonder how much further it was going to be, the woman just said softly, "Just another block or two." Mom came up to a red light at a busy inner-city intersection. At this point, she got a weird feeling, but nothing too alarming. As my mom looked round from behind the wheel, she checked the rearview mirror, threw the car in park, and threw open the door. That wasn't a little lady in the back seat. It was clear as day a man that tried luring her into his house from God knows where. She's right in the middle of the intersection. She gets out of the car and opens the back seat door. She told the man to get out of her car right then. He got up, looked at her, and walked away into the streets. My mom never picked up anyone ever again. When my son was a baby, my mother-in-law would watch him first while we worked, before my shift started at 6 a.m. I would pick up the baby early to drive into mother-in-law's house, and turn around and go right to work. It was about 1.5 miles from mother-in-law's house, and I'd travel down the main road. One particular morning, I drove traveling south at approximately 5:15 a.m. to drop the baby off at my mother-in-law's house. It was mid-October and the sun wasn't quite up yet. Near the side of the road on the opposite side, I noticed an older model black vehicle sitting with no driver or passenger. It wasn't quite parked at the side of the road, but it sure wasn't sticking out to block traffic either. It legit looks like a stranded person. I dropped the baby off at the mother-in-law's house and left to go to work, using the same road passing the same area. I saw the same car, but now it was on my side of the road because I was traveling north. I slowed down because I suddenly noticed a man standing near the front bumper of the car. He was wearing a white button-down shirt, black pants, and was holding his hands over his head. In one hand, he was holding a key ring with keys on it. In the other, it looked to be a wallet. Being very young, altruistic, I instantly felt bad for this man, because clearly his car had broken down at the side of the road with no help. To put this in perspective, back then, not everyone had cell phones, and yes, I'm older now. Altruistic me slows down. As I got closer in, the man's face brightened up, making me feel even better for thinking about being a good person. Clearly, he was a businessman who had broken down on the side of the road. He was likely late for work, and there I am to help, right? He approaches my car, and he says to me,
"You've answered my prayer. Could you just take me a mile up the road?"
I said, "Sure, of course. Did your car break down?" He replied,
"It's a good thing that's not my car."
Then I quickly reasoned that it must be his wife's car. He got into the car, and I told him to put his seatbelt on. I was used to buckling the baby into his car seat by now. Back then, there wasn't enough seatbelt use. The thing I remember about this instant is so weird. He buckles. As it does, and I proceeded to put the car in drive, I asked him if I could drop him off at work or wherever he was going, because I just wanted to make small talk with my passenger. But at the moment I was pulling away from his car, or not his car, he leans forward towards me and says,
So do you want to know how many murders I've had?
My heart sunk for a quick second, and I laughed, hoping he'd be laughing with me. Silence. So I glanced over him while trying to drive and keep my composure. He's staring at me with dead eyes and a smirk on his face. I instantly became panicked and angry, remembering all of the useless self-defense tips I'd learned. I realized that at this point in time they'd do no good. I was in a vehicle with a stranger that I shouldn't have let into my car. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Before I could get another thought through my head, he said,
Why did he think that was my car on the side of the road? I'm not allowed to have a license, let alone a girl.
And he laughed the most horrid laugh I've ever heard to this day. I'll never forget it. I slammed on the brake as soon as he laughed. There was barely any traffic. I was hoping a car with a rear could get me to signal the police for any sort of help or anything. From the pit of my soul, I screamed, Get the hell out of my car or I'll stab you. I didn't have a knife, and I don't know why I said what I said, but he unbuckled his seatbelt and dashed out of my car. I was so shaken and pulled off as fast as I could and went straight to work to share the morning experience with my co-workers. I'm shaking right now. I can imagine the mess I was by the time I got to work. It was so horrible.